Hi, I'm Jim McCann, founder of 1-800-Flowers. We created this podcast to share the wonderful people we get to interact with, we get to meet, we get to know, and most importantly, get to learn from. So I invite you to join us on this journey here on the Celebrations Chatter podcast. Well, we're here today with Randy Lewis. Randy has a really interesting story, and it's one that's near and dear to our heart. And I'd love for him to share the impact he's had on so many people. I think there are, again, so many lessons for us all to learn here. Give us a little idea about where you grew up and what your career path has been.
I was brought up in Texas, so I had 35 years of heat. And then I transferred jobs. I started in consulting. I was 17 years in consulting. And then took a job, moved up to Chicago, and one of my clients, I was a client there for 5 years. The client for 5 years was Walgreens. And I worked out there and we redid all their supply chain systems. And it was a great job. I got to see it from the inside and all that. And as the project was ending, the head of HR said, "Let's have breakfast." And I said, thinking, he said, the head of head of supply chain is going to retire in a couple of years. And we like your work, and if you don't, we'd like you to come on as a vice president. If you don't screw it up, you'll replace him. So, and then I stayed there in that position 20 years.
The heart of the matter we're leading to is, tell us about your family and tell us about your son.
Okay, when we moved up here, we had a daughter, and then we had a son, which we were very happy about. That was probably, he's 36 today. And so let's take that back. And I was working on the Walgreens project. Mm-hmm. And our son we remembered that he seemed to take a long time to start speaking. He got to 2 and wasn't talking. And then we found out that a lot of the family would start talking, saying there may be something wrong, which we completely rejected that. We just said boys are delayed, so what? So we finally, as a parent kept hounding us to go get him examined, we just said, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to get him tested just so you get us off our back. And we did have him tested. And when the results, and I remember the trip as we were going in and getting all the results. I told Kay, he's going to tell us this is a delay and we've gone through nothing. It's a wasted trip. And we got there, and the guy brought us in his office, the doctor, and he laid it out, and he started going through the results. And he said, well, we couldn't test on this. Was not testable for these things, so we don't know. And my reaction was, well, will he get better? Trying to look at the bright side.
Sure.
And he took off his glasses. I remember this, Jim. He stopped, took off his glasses, and looked straight at me. He says, he might get worse. And that's when the bottom fell out. And they called it pervasive developmental delay, PDA, which from a lot of people is another word that turns out to be autism. So that's where we started, not knowing what's going to happen. Now, Austin would use some words, but he didn't start speaking. So first of all, we got very intensive on trying to make an intervention.
Sure.
And we found a place that was an expert in language, because people with autism, it's not learning language like a foreign language. It's language as a concept. And they had to explain that to me. It's speech therapy, but it's not to get rid of a lisp or whatever the way we speak. It's to process language. He started speaking a lot, probably about age 10. And if you met him today, you will think he's trying to make up for lost time. But it's really interesting going through that journey. I mean, it's a real stress on families. And we decided.
No question about it.
because we had a daughter before Austin, 2 years older, and we had a daughter 2 years behind. And a lot of us parents got to decide, what are we going to do? Because a lot of people, it's easy to devote all your time because you're so focused on that.
Sure.
To your other children. And so we had a lot of discussions and saying, no, we're not going to go to Canada for this special treatment or all this kind of stuff. We happen to have a Martian who's born in an Earthling world. So how do we help him? We're not going to make him an Earthling, but how can we help him cope in that? And we're going to give it our best shot, but we're going to do it as a family. And today, his relationship with his older and younger sister is fantastic.
Are Sarah and Allison local there in Greater Chicagoland?
My daughter, Sarah, she's over in Maine.
Uh-huh.
My daughter, Allison, has just moved back from Atlanta for a long time after college. So
she came back for the weather.
Well, she came back right before COVID. So she ended up living with us 2 years. And that was a real experience. This little college girl that left 7 years ago. And all of a sudden, this adult woman shows up at my house.
How did that happen? I bet you loved it.
Oh, it was fantastic.
Yeah.
It was fantastic. I mean, I don't like to talk about COVID because my experience was, we had the family there, and with all the inconveniences, but we didn't have to go through all the suffering that most of the population had to go through.
And you had access to Walgreens.
Well, exactly. And that's the great thing about being retired. That story's not that far from it. Now nobody knows who the heck I am. I'm just another one of those old guys coming in every once in a while.
But he seems to pay a lot of attention to everything with wheels on
it. Exactly. That was what was driving it. But the thing I found out, you get drafted into this. Nobody would volunteer for this. The heroes to me are people who adopt children with disability. I come across those people every once in a while, and I hug them. I mean, nobody really signs up for it, but
special people.
Oh, definitely. But I found out in talking to other parents, thinking about a job is one of the first things you think about. That was my first thought. What's he going to do?
How will they fend for themselves? As a responsible sibling or as a parent, you don't put your head on the pillow any night without wondering what happens after I'm gone. And the toughest time seems to me to be when they age out of school programs, because we're blessed now, in the 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, in the dark ages of treatments of the people with mental health issues of any different kind, developmental issues, physical disabilities, any kind of special challenges. It was the dark ages. But over those decades, school programs really developed. But what happens when the school programs end? And this is where your vision really pipes in here. What happens? How do they make a living? What happens to them socially? What happens after school programs end and they don't have a job? And what if they're not fortunate enough to have a family around them that can support them? That's the danger time. And that's what we all worry about, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. It's a thought that comes around at the first. It probably comes up thinking about Austin where he is, and probably about every 10 minutes.
Yep.
And then over time, it kind of lessens out. And then, as you say, as you start to wind down, you're out of the school system, because you're focused so much on academics and all that socialization and everything. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're all of a sudden into a transition program. And that's only 3 years in state Illinois. I don't know where it is. In New York, y'all seem to be, I think y'all are more than us, but that's not enough time to prepare.
No, it isn't.
And so it's a real panic then, because you've been in that school. Now it's going to be, what do we do? And that's the challenge we have and still have.
And what was brought to my attention, Gary, is the book you wrote about the journey that you're just starting to tell us about. It's called No Greatness Without Goodness, as is evidenced by those who are fortunate enough to be able to watch this, because you have the step and repeat behind you. But this book came to my attention because this is something. I have a brother, Kevin, a younger brother who was born developmentally disabled, and we've tried our best as a family and now as an enterprise, both as a business and a not-for-profit, that we created to create jobs for people with disabilities who didn't have jobs before. And it started with trying to create a job for our brother. And because we're in the flower and plant business, a friend of ours had the idea that we should build a greenhouse and create jobs for people like my brother Kevin, which we did. And now we have 400 or 500 people who work in different, mostly ag, but increasingly hospitality settings too. These people wouldn't have had a job otherwise. And this was a good idea of a friend of mine who created an agency who takes care of my brother Kevin, who lives in one of their group homes. And he's a wonderful saintly kind of guy. Walter Stockton is his name. And it was his idea that we could create what we now call Smile Farms. But tell us about your journey. Here you are, Mr. Logistics expert. You've helped Walgreens dominate the corners of America and bring us toothpaste and other essentials and prescriptions at the best possible cost. And now you take your energies, your knowledge, and your passion and your responsibility as a parent and said, I need to do more for this particular population, for my son, Randy, and for people like Randy. So tell us the journey and what you did and what you wrote about here in No Greatness Without Goodness.
He gets diagnosed, and immediately I put up on my cubicle out there at Walgreens a little phrase I'd heard: for all that has happened, thank you. And for all that is to come, yes. Just to set an attitude, what are we going to do about this? So I got offered the job in 92 as a vice president, but I became in charge of the entire supply chain in like 95. And my first meeting with we had annual meetings of our leadership. And I made an impassioned speech and told them the story and say, if we can't do something about this, who could? And I told the story about Austin because you can talk about it, but unless people feel it, how you and I will talk about that, what an impact on us and the difference it's going to make, nothing happens. So I told them the story, and a couple of buildings went out there and they just went to an agency and said, look, we got some non-critical work. Why don't you bring a group in here, maybe tagging merchandise, it may be some custodial stuff. And a couple of buildings did that, and everybody thought we were incredible. We got awards for being great citizens and stuff. And I was thinking, gosh, this is great. And then I was down in visiting our Dallas center, and they had a group. We call this an enclave, where they have their own management company, and they're like contractors to us. And this woman showed me the picture of the group, and she said, they're great. And I didn't know who she was because she's in the picture. And I'm thinking, who is this woman? And she said, oh, and she must have seen my confusion. She said, oh, I'm not one of them. I'm their sponsor. Great. And I thought, wow, I'm not one of them. I mean, it was just like, boom, it hit me on the side of the head. I thought, we got to do better than this. And I got the idea. I talked to the people, the buildings that had enclaves. I said, these people have been in our building 2 or 3 years. Certainly, some of them can do the work. So why don't we give them a chance and ask for volunteers among our team members who would be a volunteer coach? And let's see how they do. And they did great. And that kept up. And then we were building distribution centers right and left. And it was a huge, that growth area. And we were planning a new generation of a building that was going to open up in 2007. So I think it started probably about 2003, we started planning for it. And because it cost a lot of money. And we thought, well, maybe we can just tweak the equipment. We were going to do all new technology. Everything that we learned building the other buildings, every building was more advanced than the previous one. That's what's
Sure.
great. That's how you stay on top, because you keep taking advantage, and technology is changing fast. So, okay, we're going to not just spend any more money because we have shareholders to they're accountable to. So well, maybe we can just tweak it. Let's just think about people that may not be able to reach as far. Maybe some people that need more privacy. Maybe when we have an option, let's just be creative. We're not going to hire consultants to do this. We know our work. We know the technology. Let's just take that attitude. And so we proceeded that way. And as far as goal, we set a pretty high goal. And we said, remember working with those enclaves, we used 2 of our team members to be a coach for 1 person. And that was successful. And we're going to hire 600 people in this building. And why don't we apply that 2 for 1, a typically able person team member for each person with a disability? So let's go ahead and set a goal, 10%. Well, see, that'd be 30% would be people with disabilities, 1 out of 3. And everybody embraced it. It was what we called a clear and elevating goal. And we said, and as we go along, if there's something we need to do that to accommodate, we don't call it accommodations. We call them adjustments because accommodations are expensive and get you in trouble. So we call that adjustments. We said, okay, be creative. And if you don't have the authority to do it, kick it upstairs and we'll see what we can do. And if we change a policy, we're going to change any policy that gets in the way of an effective workforce. And we're going to call that a pilot. Because if you call it a change, everybody wants to jump in there and you can't do that. But we know if you call a project a pilot, everybody goes, oh, okay. So everything is a lot of pilots. That's how we got through.
We're going to steal that one from you.
Exactly. That's how you hide something you're going to do. You don't.
You're right, because everybody's an expert on why it can't be done.
Exactly. I mean, somebody said, wow, how did you risk all this kind of stuff? I said, you don't get to this level without figuring out how to avoid responsibility for a failure. And you know how to hide things that you want to do. That's the criteria to get there. And we opened that first building and it exceeded our expectations.
What I'm guessing, but it must have had an interesting impact on the other 2 workers.
Oh, that's the magic of this thing. We thought we'd be impressive. Well, let me kind of tell you what we would do. Another thing because to make this something this big to happen, we had to have buy-in all the way down to the floor of the building, and everybody had to know that we were serious about this.
Yep.
This is not going to be a build month. So what we said we were going to do, I got invited to my first all store manager meeting in Las Vegas. And the supply chain guys never been invited because we were the reason when you went to a Walgreens store and you were out, I was the reason. So the store managers never really wanted to hear anything from me. So I went there and I told them.
Did you have to have a disguise on or anything?
Well, they didn't even look at me the first 10 minutes of the presentation. But when I told them about it, I told them, all this building is going to make you happy and we're going to do all this kind of stuff. They didn't care about that. And I said, oh, by the way, and 1/3 of the workforce is going to be people with disabilities. People had never had a job before. Boom. All of a sudden, everybody looked up from their BlackBerries at the time and said, wow, and started. And I said, what got their attention, we never used to, for the 100 years, never let any other companies come and visit our buildings because we thought we had
is the secret sauce.
Or that we were so bad, we didn't want them to know either way. So it went on both ends. So, but I said, we're going to open our doors to the world, including our competitors. And we did do that. And in years since, all these companies, probably 500 companies, have been through our buildings. And we gave everything away. We even had a boot camp where they could send their managers to our buildings and work in there for 2 weeks and learn. And a lot of other companies took that and moved it forward. So that was the thing. And we would have.
Randy, that's terrific what you did there. Just absolutely terrific.
Blind hog finds acorn every once in a while. But it was everybody got it. by empowering them, like the biggest obstacle was overcoming everybody's fear. I mean, frontline managers, what do I do? You said, give it your best. That's all you got to do. And some people are not going to be successful. We got to realize that. If we're really going to, anybody can hire somebody that's really not that has as much of a challenge in a disability. Those are pretty easy. Now, they have bias against those people. Like I think deaf people, for us, our jobs, a deaf person is really not much of a disability. So it would not be that challenging to hire deaf. And some people
have someone lift some heavy boxes who only has one arm. Now there's a visible disability.
Oh, or all kinds of things, kinds of things. But those are easy. If we're going to make a difference, we got to go deep in the pool. People who would never have a chance for a job, and some of those will be successful, but some of them will not.
And do you have any kind of anything to report in terms of the numbers of people in that pool of talent that were successful versus weren't?
90% of our people come through that are successful. What we do is we have a 9-week internship. We pay them, but they're interns, and they have 9 weeks to learn the job.
Yes.
We give them 2 weeks of social stuff because these folks have probably never had a job, showing up. And during that 2 weeks, we learn they can show up. But how do you, if you need help, how do you ask for it? Those kind of the social things. And then when they're successful at that, that's unpaid. The agencies that bring the candidates in. Then we have a 9-week full-time. You got your boss, you've got a coach, peer coach, and so 90%.
A peer coach, that's important.
Oh, and it's key, and it's interesting in the buildings now. Everything we did for a person with a disability, we do for a person without a disability. So every team member, when they start, has a peer mentor. Mm-hmm. Everything we did for people with disabilities made it better for people without disability.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. 1-800-Flowers. Share with love.
Tell us about ATP.
Now that's our secret sauce. All
right, share it with us. Come on, Randy. Nobody listens.
Well, I was at our Connecticut center, and I was talking to the HR guy there, and they did the same thing. And I was asking, I said, we've been through this a lot now. What's the key thing when there's a problem? And he says, ATP. And I said, ATP, what's that? I've never heard of that. He says, ask the person. If somebody's rate drops all of a sudden, you don't go up and say, hey, you're not doing as well, my way or the highway. You ask the question, what's up? Let's try to get to what's the issue.
Yep.
And nobody wanted to, because nobody wants to fire a person with a disability.
Sure.
So the magic, we discovered there's a magic here. People with a disability, and you and I know this, they change us. We may help them, but we are changed.
Also, Randy, it seems that the people who want to work in that environment, who don't have, the obvious disabilities, it's self-selecting. When word gets out that Walgreens Distribution Center has a third of their workforce of people with disabilities, I think that has I think that sends out a message to all those who are going to consider working there that if you have a problem with that, you need not apply.
Oh, yeah, it self-selects that. So that's the question. Do we get better humans or do we make better humans? I think.
Yes.
I think some of them will self-select, but we pay pretty well. Mm-hmm. And some of them didn't, but they will talk about how they've been changed and it's changed them in different ways. I show a film.
A core tenet of your program there at Walgreens was same work to the same standards for the same pay.
Exactly. because nobody could come in here and say, "Oh yeah, that's great. Hire people with disabilities if you can afford it." So that was, when people do this, they ask me, "What's the key?" You got to decide what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do.
But it's a different atmosphere, isn't it, Randy? Tell us about Chuck.
Yeah, Chuck was one of those people in Enclave before we went big. He was kind of one of those people that we brought him out of the Enclave, gave him a chance, and he worked with two ladies. One of the things, he had autism, but he had drives. And we learned his favorite color is purple. I think everybody at the Walgreens company knows his color because we told this story. And why it's purple, well, I don't know why it's purple, but every time we would have a purple tote, when we pick our orders, we put them in plastic. In a Walgreens store, you get one, we will ship one, or three of items. We don't ship cases much. So it's individual items. And each center has their own color. And occasionally they get mixed up. The color in Connecticut was not purple, but there would be occasionally like one or two a day from the building use purple totes. And Chuck noticed it every time they would come by. And he would start dancing and let everybody know that there's a purple tote. Pure joy.
In years gone by, that would have been something a manager would be embarrassed about or try and counsel him out of doing. And you went the other way.
Well, it got down to the question, well, which do we prefer? Dancing or complaining? And it's a pretty easy choice. Let's go with the dancing. So,
and speaking of dancing, we do have to interrupt here to come back to, something about dancing too.
Well, when I was in college, I'd been in Peace Corps and I came back and I was going to graduate school. And in Peace Corps,
where did you serve in the Peace Corps?
Peru. And I made a lot of money. They give you at the end of 2 years, they give you $1,200.
Wow! So you're living large.
Yeah. So it didn't pay much tuition in grad school. So I got a job, and I got a job as an Arthur Murray dance instructor because when I was in high school, I did it as an after school job. So it was a pretty fun job to do, and it didn't require a lot of heavy
Now, did
lifting.
Chuck teach you some new steps?
Chuck has his own whole style. So, I don't know his name, but he has his own unique style.
Unteachable.
Right. Yeah, but everybody has their own dance. Everybody has their own view. So he kind of fits in, and it's opened up everybody else's eyes.
And so this program, tell us about it today, 10 years after you've retired from Walgreens. What's this program look like within Walgreens today?
Well, here's what's incredible that, when you do something like this, and I was the driver behind it, you worry about is he going to succeed after you're gone?
Absolutely.
Because, everybody knew that I was completely devoted to this. They've had 4 people replace me since I've left, and the program is still on. And I think it's because it's been there long enough and everybody knows it works. And those 2 buildings that have the highest percentage of people with disabilities are the highest performing buildings.
Isn't that something?
In the chain. So it was a good thing to do. It was a good thing to do for the shareholders too. And it was a great thing to do for families and for us.
How proud are you?
Proud, but more grateful.
Yeah.
It
took a lot of, obviously on your part, a lot of courage, a lot of stick-to-itiveness, but it took a lot of courage on the part of your bosses in the highest reaches of Walgreens to give you cover until you get this in and prove that it works and show that it works economically and it works culturally and that it has benefit for everybody involved. Not just the number of people who work at Walgreens who have a disability, but for their families and their extended families and their communities as well. These are people who would otherwise be a burden on society. And now tell us, how it's impacted. I'll ask you about Randy in a minute, but how it's impacted the people in that program, because as you and I know, and everyone knows, work is a lot more than about a paycheck. It's about dignity. It's about a raison d'etre. It's why you get up in the morning. It's social. It's health. Give us some idea of the impact you think it's had on all those thousands of people who work at Walgreens, who have disabilities, who make those buildings run most efficiently in the whole system.
Well, I think there's two groups. I think people with disabilities and the people who work with people. I think that's maybe the bigger one. So I'll talk about that. Well, there's no doubt it's had an impact on them. They talk about, I have a car now, or I have, here it kind of says a lot about it. We, at that first building, we built a place, we worked with the city to bring a bus out there to the center because it's in a remote place. And we built a shade stand so people could wait out there. And I was at that building one time and the bus pulls up and there's nobody getting on it. And I'm thinking, gee whiz, what's the deal? So I asked somebody in the building, so, I only saw 5 people out there. We got 200 people with disabilities. What's the deal? And she said, well, when you pay somebody a living wage, they can find out how to get to work. Because now they have money to do that. They don't have to be dependent upon all these other things. That says a lot right there. Our turnover is lower for people with disabilities and without in the buildings. So now we don't tell the supervisors who has a disability or not.
Yep.
So somebody used to, when we started, somebody would come up and say, like a supervisor, say, okay, I'm working with Mike over here. I've been having some issues, and I just need to know if it's personality or disability. Inferring if it's personality, I'm going to my way or the highway. Disability will be different. And I remember that question got kicked up to me one time. And I said, well, the answer is yes, because
they're not separable.
Personality is a disability.
Yes.
And as we go into the impact on people without disability, one of the things when we said to open the doors, when somebody comes, the first that they'll do a tour and they're told, oh, by the way, when you go through here, people are going to come up and talk to you, which is not typically when you go into an industrial site. You're going to ignore them. They said, be prepared. People are going to come up to you and they're going to tell you about their job. That's one thing about the culture here. And after we finish, we're going to go into the Las Vegas room. That's a conference room we call Las Vegas room because what goes on here stays here. So ask all your questions like, how do you fire a person with a disability? The answer to that is, how do you fire a person without a disability? Because if you need to make it as special, you're doing it wrong for people without disability. But what's a bad day? So they will listen to managers talk about what it is to work there, the managers. And you can see that there's a video a student made, and it's on my website, NOGWOG, No Greatness Without Goodness, NOGWOG.org. And on the front page, have you seen it, Jim?
Yes.
Okay. That really says a lot right there. When people come in, other visitors come in, they think they're here to hear about disabilities. And they want to do good things. But when they hear managers talk, what it's about, they say, I want this culture. I want our people to talk about our place like your people talk about your place.
So that brings me to a question, which is how has this been contagious? Tell us some great contagion stories outside of Walgreens.
Well, here's an interesting thing I didn't know until this year. I was out in the Northwest where Amazon is and Microsoft. That's out there in Washington. And I was called in by an agency to make a speech for their 50th anniversary about disabilities. And so all the people from the business community were there. It was a big event. So I tell them the story, and everybody thinks, oh, yeah, that's great. Well, I didn't know. I only found out last year when the head of that agency, we got together with we were good friends, and Amazon started the program. I've known that. I've known that over the years. But he told me the story. He says they had 2 or 3 vice presidents there that day. And at the end of it, they came over to us and said, we want to do this. And we became their partner.
How great.
Wow. I had no idea of that because Amazon never called me up or asked me anything.
Uh-huh.
But I found it on the internet. Yeah, there was something reported in the paper. Oh, wow, who knows? So that's one that happened. But a lot of people would call me up to see Lowe's, Microsoft, but they probably did a lot of it on their own. I mean, big companies, Toyota. There's a whole list of companies.
How terrific! How terrific! You and your family must be so proud of what you and Austin started here. Tell me about Austin today. 36 years old.
Now this is what is interesting. We had no distribution centers near us where we live. And
of course, you were those rich guys.
What's that?
You and those rich guys live far away.
Oh yeah. So, and if I had done this, people ask me, so you did this to help your son.
Yep.
If I had done that, I couldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it because that would have been self-serving. I mean, it would always been tainted with that. I want to get my son a job.
Yep.
Certainly want to get him a job. But we didn't have any incentives near here. So, but one of the buildings that had come and seen it and said, I want that culture was Meijer, which is a regional chain up here of general merchandise and very successful, privately held. So 9 years ago, I get a call from him, who's now the CEO of Rick Keys, who's now the CEO of Meijer. He calls me up and he says, we're getting ready to build a building, distribution center on the border of Wisconsin up there by you. I don't know how far that is, but if Austin can get there, we got a job for him. So Austin has been working at Meijer on the second shift that other people don't like, in an area that other people don't like.
Mm.
He's been working there for 9 years, perfect attendance.
That's great.
So we would know that something here helps something there, serendipity.
Yeah, maybe a little more. And when did you decide to write this book, No Greatness Without Goodness?
I got a call from an agent probably around 2009 or what, and said, you need to write a book. And I said, no, I got a job. I don't have time. Now, I haven't written a book. That was really smart for me to say. When I finally retired, there was a woman who was a writer who loved the story, but was not able to find backing for it because they said, this is a personal story. You can't write it in third person. And she had called me up and I said, well, I don't know. Then I decided when I retired, I called her up and I said, look, I guess I'm ready to write the book. Why don't you be my coach?
Yep.
And let's go forward. And she was my coach. I'd send her stuff and she said, well, that sucks. She said a nicer way than that, but I mean, essentially, cut to the chase.
But you got the message.
I got the message. So I started writing and it took about a year and another 6 months to take all the stuff out and make it right.
Now you have Nagwag and the website that goes with it. You have the book, and you're often asked to speak around the country about what you've done and tell your story to inspire others to mimic it and keep those seeds growing and spreading. And I understand that you take all the royalties from the book and all the fees from your speaking engagements and you bring them right back to Nagwag so that this effort would get louder and stronger and keep spreading around the country, around the world.
Exactly. Well, and it's been around. It's having an impact in Korea. One of the big retailers in the UK took the model, same thing. So they're teaching each other now. I'm not tied to this so much anymore. Everybody's taking it forward, which was likely your dream when you began. Yeah, and oh, by the way, I didn't do this alone, and I wasn't the first. goes by. It's a team effort.
You're
Team
a good
effort,
shepherd.
and a team of people we don't even know each other. And that's when it's the best.
How wonderful. Randy, thanks for sharing your story with us. It's just amazing. All of us should be trying to mimic what you planted as a little seed there all those years ago at Walgreens. Applause to the leadership of Walgreens for making this effort work in your absence and continue to grow. And for all those companies that you mentioned that have come through your building, learned about the program, and making a difference in people's lives and families' lives every day. You don't want to take the credit, but it's too bad. We get to decide you get it, and we applaud you and wish there were more people like you, Randy Lewis. Thanks so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thanks, Jim. And by the way, I think what you did was a lot harder than what I did.
Oh, no.
Thank you.
We're trying to mimic what you do here in our companies here at Flowers, in our Harry and David company, and we have a lot of companies in your backyard there in Chicagoland, and we're trying to mimic what you did right now to make it an even bigger impact. So
mine is yours.
Good. We'll as soon as it warms above zero, we'll drag you over to one of our buildings, show you what we're doing.
Sounds great.
Well, thanks, Randy. I hope the rest of this new year is great for you too.
And the same to you.
We put our heart into everything we do. We are farmers, bakers, florists, and makers who grow and create with a passion. Made with love at every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, we know you're sending more than a gift. 1-800-Flowers, share with love.
Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I know I'll be sharing it forward. I hope you get to as well. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow me along on Twitter at Jim1800Flowers and on LinkedIn at Jim McCann. Hope to talk to you soon.